Think? Okay. So welcome, Paul, for our long time planned webinar that is finally happening, even against all the odds of the technology. So very much looking forward to your talk. Would you like to have questions in the middle, or would you like just to go through the presentation and have the conversation by the end?
Oh, I think questions in the middle would be great.
Oh, great. Okay.
I suspect one or two of you have seen this before. I'm kind of on a road show talking about the laboratory and this particular idea of creating a collective practice or praxis. And I would welcome interruptions for clarification, especially, and also to critique. I'm looking for ways of improving everything and looking for a collective interest in continuing beyond this narrow moment together.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. We attended a webinar before that. Andrew was also there with the Italian group, with the NEO Cybernetics group. But I found it really fascinating, the experiment that you are doing, and I think that for the whole community, the Metaforum community, we're also beginning to have to do some educational experiments in Metaforum, and
Great.
so several of us are educators, and I
Indeed.
think that there is a beautiful possibility. What you are doing bring us an open space that is very interesting thing to explore. So, well, just wanting to learn from you and hear from you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for coming. Give me a moment to share and start the slides. Also, the slides were available in the chat,
Yes.
and I welcome future commentary about it. But if you wish to follow along there or here, there are some builds in the slides, which I always enjoy making. So I hope you're patient about that. Cybernetics escapes the laboratory. My thanks to Angela and everyone in Metaform for having me come today. There's a metaphor here. I think you'll catch it right away. Uh, but I think a little bit of introduction would be valuable to the context here, um, and ultimately the goal of planning a collective practice. And I realize many of you know a lot of this. This is prepared somewhat for a audience that knows perhaps very little about cybernetics, and I might skip over some areas faster than others in the anticipation that it's not necessary for certain detail here. So if cybernetics is grounded in purposeful action, and yet laboratories are grounded in experiments and testing and analysis. Similarly, if cybernetics is a way of acting in the world, dancing with nature, a la our wonderful colleague, Andy Pickering. Thank you for coming today, Andy. While laboratories seek to isolate phenomena, to measure, to reproduce, to predict, and so on, then how might we incubate cybernetics across disciplines and geographies and generations? You may recognize transgenerational, transgeographic, and cultural transgenerational, transdisciplinary was the first one I meant to say. So expanding from transdisciplinary to across geographies and generations. But as a living response to the design challenges of our era to respond to today's so-called wicked challenges. So how might we incubate cybernetics to respond to the challenges? This is the general theme today. The outline is I will talk very briefly on the origin of the hashtag Numacy idea, give you a bit more detail about the laboratory for cybernetics that has these facets here at Carnegie Mellon, and then to focus really on the idea, the metaphor of escaping the laboratory. So if we frame cybernetics as acting with the world, how does the laboratory contribute to that? So my idea is to create a collective praxis. I'm sure you're all familiar with praxis as a serious endeavor to go from theory to practice in the world. How might we escape the laboratory? I have a model, kind of process model that's very much in development. And lastly, I'll end with an invitation to collaborate. So the new Macy origins, obviously, you know Macy in the 40s and 50s, the range of disciplines, the revolution that was started. the art of steering, acting with intention, and how Macy meetings change the world. It felt to me in 2020, at the onset of COVID, that we needed a revolution again to address today's wicked problems. This is a short list. The list can be much longer, again, defined originally from 2020. But I think, as we would all agree, science has failed to tame these wicked challenges, wicked problems. I use those two phrases interchangeably for reasons that I might speak of later. Governance has failed, socio-technical systems. All this has failed, and will society fail is, I think, a question that all of us here are concerned about. So how do we face these wicked challenges? To respond with variety, of course, we must convene conversations that move toward action, that are transdisciplinary, transglobal, transgenerational, as mentioned, and that engage all roles involved in bringing technology to society in hopes of bringing about positive change. There are many links in this PDF that's available in the chat, I hope, for you to explore later. So the audacious idea was to go from the original Macy meetings to a modernized hashtag, New Macy Meetings, from this commitment that cybernetics allows us to move forward in a way that other disciplines and other approaches do not. I don't think I'm needing to convince you all, but cybernetics embodies the art and science of purpose of systems. Detailed models of regulation can be quantitative if you like. The second order move brings an ethical imperative to human action. Once we look at other systems and their purpose for their purpose, we must look at our own actions for our purpose, and in that way cannot avoid being responsible. This is Heinz von Forster, as you all know. It was founded as transdisciplinary, or as we owe to Andy Pickering, antidisciplinary, and it applies across siloed disciplines, requiring us to embrace the unknowable and unpredictable, which is always fascinating when talking to students. So again, quickly, you know this history, the original Macy meetings, in the context of this, the bullets on the left. 2020 to present, there were corresponding parallels, and indeed ending with the idea that we must add transglobal and transgenerational to the origin. So this was the justification, if you will, for hashtag New Macy. And there have been many engagements since then. This is a short list, which again, a series of links that are in the PDF if you wish to explore. We've done a series of sessions in various places. We continue to meet, and anyone here is welcome to join. We tend to meet once a month on the first Saturday in a free-form discussion, but we also feel the need to be a little more organized about topics, and we're planning to meet every Thursday, not every Thursday, every month on a Thursday, starting in January, perhaps, because there are many issues and topics that we feel we might be more specific about. So the commitment from 2020 was conversations for action, and the idea that a rich mesh of collaborations across all these would let us be deliberate about what we wish to conserve. You recognize the invocation of Maturana there. And the counter, of course, that we need today, given the hegemony of AI, it's digital, non-biological, non-social, algorithmic approach needs some response. And this was our call even from 2020, which still is true today. And Kate Doyle is a wonderful co-lead of this activity. So thank you for listening to that intro. Now, the laboratory itself was started here in architecture in January. I have the luck, one might say, or karma, or fate, that the head of architecture here is a man named Omar Khan. Omar, when he was at the Architectural Association in London in the early 90s, as a student of architecture, had Gordon Pask as a lecturer. And when we both came to this campus, we had known each other already for 10 years, and now another 5 or 6 on top of that here. And he invited me, along with his other faculty, of course, to start a laboratory. And I've done it in under the requirements that he makes, which include specific projects, pathway to funding, faculty support, and so on. So a few obvious things to this audience: systems with purpose, to steer a pilot. It's very useful to talk about cybernetics in the context of design and designers. Feedback is guidance to effective action. Effective action means achieving goals and evolving them. Here's the second order move. And here's a document about cybernetics in a laboratory context. Cybernetics, of course, uses information and processes. Just to repeat, what is a laboratory? It needs to be experimental. And this lab is grounded in student-led projects with no fixed curriculum. And I'm building resources such as a repository of models and methods. Also an explicit way of matching student scholars, as I call them, to in-world practitioners, not so that the practitioners can teach or mentor or play the expert, but rather engage in the worldview and the domains of interest of the student. And the emphasis on wicked challenges, I think, is quite straightforward. This example here, social justice, climate change, and AI, may be worth calling out because Omar Khan, when he came to architecture here, realized that there were paths to modernize the curriculum, which had been grounded in buildings, of course, and planning and all the usual things you associate with architecture. So he created 3 pillars of a new pedagogy and said to his faculty, go forth and add these to the curriculum. These being social justice, climate change, and AI, quite explicitly. So clearly we are kindred spirits in our concern for these particular wicked challenges, as well as their relation to architecture broadly made. So this is the overview of the laboratory. Again, you can find more materials at the link. I teach a course which scaffolds students' ideas. I won't dwell on this particularly. And the syllabus of the course, grounded in Praxis, starts from an entry point of the student scholars' domains and concerns. So their first assignment is, what are you concerned about and why? What domain? Ocean sustainability. Why are you concerned about ocean sustainability? It's an example I always use. Because I'm concerned about single-use plastic bags. Well, that was a surprise. But it also tells us that it's not just the domain, but why the student is concerned, where their emotional commitment comes. And of course, there, a matching to an in-world practitioner means perhaps someone interested in consumer communication rather than the count of bags in the bloodstreams of dolphins or what have you. Not that that's unimportant, but again, I'm always concerned about where the student scholar is starting. The flow of the course is first the lens of systems literacy. This is a no-brainer to us. It's becoming more common that students come with this in mind. But even so, what does this mean? What does it mean to be literate in systems, to read them, to write them, to understand them, and to be able to communicate with them? Once they have this view, with some readings, which are available, there's a link here I'll mention in a moment. What are the maps and models that students might build? There's a lot of map making in design schools these days, which are often just mind maps. A is connected to B. Well, that's useless. You know why you connected A to B, but I don't know what you meant by the line between them. So minimally causal loop diagrams or concept maps are required, in my view. Then again, once they look at readings in maps and models, they're asked to talk again about their own domains and concerns. So each time they absorb a new lens, through readings and through responses and discussion, they're asked to revisit their own articulation of their domains and concerns. And of course, that evolves, and that's the point. Another lens is the problem with problems. This is the reason behind my moving from wicked problems, which of course is canonical and Rittel, Horst Rittel, and so on. You're familiar with this, I expect. The problem with the problem is, oh, I know what the problem is, and I'm going down a path, and I'm not thinking about other consequences or other causes or the system as a whole. I know what's wrong. I'm going to fix it. Well, that's a problem, particularly with wicked challenges, where indeed the interactions, the entanglements, as we like to say these days, are so rich and complicated that it's a problem to know what to focus on. I hope you see what I did there. Anyway, beyond wicked challenges is a lens of cybernetics, including, of course, second order. And from there, ultimately, the argument that design in the modern age is a challenge of conversation. Because there's no single designer that does anything these days, especially in these wicked areas. And so, again, Rittel's original argument is that design is about rhetoric, about argumentation, about persuading, and not in a false sense of persuasion, but rather bringing together a consensus of values and therefore a consensus of action. And the student is then engaged in critique and going around the circle of this. So this is the syllabus, the course reading list, and a video, which is essentially this talk, is also available. Again, very quickly, there's a $5,000 prize, which we just adjudicated, which is to incentivize cybernetics continuing. I'm working to turn this into an endowment such that every year put in front of students in architecture and design and art and music and drama here at the College of Fine Arts of CMU, as well as the computer science department too, is put in front of them. There's a thing called cybernetics. It has this value. Think about it, propose, submit, win $5,000. So I'm anxious to have this be an ongoing thing that appears in front of students each year. We had 30 submissions last year. It's open to any CMU student. Funds are unrestricted. The primary criterion, the prime directive, let's see if you recognize this, to expand possibilities for action, to increase human agency. And if you're hearing von Forrester's ethical imperative, brava. So it's to increase the total number of choices for a person or a group. You may be familiar, I suspect you are. Heinz made this distinction between an option. I can proliferate endless options, useless, vast in number. But what are the viable choices? What are the actions I might take, that I would take, that I could take because of who I am and because of who I wish to become? Does this design brief, does this proposal increase human agency beyond existing approaches? And that is the primary criterion for this prize. More information. Forgive me, I have to push this. In 2027, we'll be mounting an exhibit, a book exhibit, curated by a close colleague of mine and I. She is an expert in AI, has been here at Carnegie Mellon for many years. I have on my right the science books of Heinz von Forster. And we will compare and contrast Heinz's books with the books of Alan Newell, one of the greats of AI and certainly one of the big heroes on this campus. Worked closely with Herb Simon, who you would know. And so can we compare and contrast these two fields? Wait a minute. Are they two fields? Yes, they are, because in 56, the people in AI said bye to cybernetics. I'm sure you know that history, at least in part. Can we bring the two fields back together in conversation, at least, perhaps reluctantly on one side, maybe on both sides? But won't there be benefit in revisiting this history? The irony, of course, is now when we say AI today, we mean 1943 cybernetics, neural nets, McCulloch and Pitts. How many students of AI know that? Too few. But again, the idea is not to castigate for lack of history these days, but to understand what may be brought together. Because I wonder if you would feel the same, that the sensibility of cybernetics can afford important differences to this train, this juggernaut, this unstoppable thing called AI, which is surely not entirely going in the right direction.
Sorry, Paul, to interrupt, but I don't
Please.
know the story of the 1957 discussion between AI and cybernetics. That would be interesting if you tell us the story.
Thank you for the interruption. Forgive my assumption. So cybernetics starts, I think we know that, 43, and in 43, McCullough Pitts write the paper that says, hey, these neural nets conceptually could compute some cool stuff. 50s comes along, digital computers on the rise. Wow, smaller, cheaper, faster. Even then, very exciting, symbolic AI, really amazing. So something was written in 55, and in 56, a bunch of researchers got together at Dartmouth. It's called the Dartmouth Summer, I think it's called a conference, but it was limited number of people. Marvin Minsky was there, John McCarthy was there, but so were many others. Oliver Selfridge, Simon and Newell were there briefly, and some other names I probably should invoke from the cybernetics side. But the goal of that conference, so-called, that meeting of some 20 people over the course of weeks, was to, may I put it this way, turn their back on cybernetics, certainly as a word, and certainly as a computation grounded in neural nets, because we of that era, we want symbolic AI. And by the way, there's this thing called cognitive science, and that seems to be a really interesting way of thinking about what's going on up there in the brain. And there are all of these experiments that we can do in psychology, and then we can write symbolic code to get the digital machines to do that. So we are going to leave behind, quote, cybernetics and neural nets. Now, there's a sidebar to this, which is you can find a quote from John McCarthy, who says, quote, a little bit of a paraphrase, but I think not unfair. Hey, we didn't really want to deal with Norbert Wiener. He was a guru, and, there were some issues there, and we didn't want to deal with him, unquote. So there's some politics there, there's some personalities there. But I think also the most fair thing to say is they didn't want a rejection of symbolic AI, and neural nets are that, or that contradiction. I shouldn't say rejection. Because in neural nets, you don't know where things go on. You can't look inside a neural net and say, oh, this is where the decision was made. And oh, this is the feature that determines this is a cat and not a dog. And again, in the rush of excitement of these digital machines where I can write code and I can play checkers and chess, and wow, it's just 5 years and we're going to have full-blown intelligence. I don't want to be distracted by this neural net stuff. I can't build neural nets back in the 50s. How much electronics does that take? What kind of computation could a neuron net with 50 neurons do? It's ridiculous. The brain has billion neurons. So why are we even worrying about that? You hear I'm trying to characterize it a little bit. So that was 1956. And as a consequence of that and subsequent writings by Minsky and Papert, neural nets were killed for a long time until a couple of decades later, somebody came along and said, hey, that mathematical proof that Minsky and Papert wrote in Perceptrons, it's not right here, but their famous Perceptrons book, that's bullshit. That's an oversimplification, they wrote, Minsky and Papert, in order to kill neural nets. And Jeffrey Hinton, I'm looking at these nets from the point of view of more complexity and more layers and backpropagation and some other cool stuff. And I can prove the counter to what they proved, which is we can compute a lot of heavy duty stuff with this. And then it took time for the digital computers to catch up to run neural nets, originally graphics cards. That's why NVIDIA is worth a lot of money, the famous graphics card hardware company. But also data. They needed data because these things don't work very efficiently. You can show a child a cat 3 times and they know what a cat is, but to make a neural net recognize a cat, you got to show 1,000. So the inefficiency of them required vast amounts of data, the internet. So internet graphical processing units, 20 years after Hinton changed the course by changing the course from 56, et cetera. I hope that wasn't too informal or,
No, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. It's a little longer than I intended it. I get a little ranty, so. All right, you've been patient. Here we are with all that preamble. Whoop, escaping again, sorry. Anyway, so again, what is this question? How might we incubate cybernetics to respond to the wicked challenges? So framing cybernetics, effective action for achieving goals, in order to know how to act, i.e. acting with the world, Andy's wonderful book with so many demonstrations in it. And indeed, my fave, Heinz talking about the same thing, right? Instead of going off into a laboratory to do a tiny experiment, Heinz also famously said, science is the act of learning more and more about less and less, right? Because you're narrowing the scope of the experiment down, 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 down until you can get net F equals MA or E equals MC squared or what have you. Actually, I don't think that was an experiment. So let's continue on a metaphorical path. You may know this phrase, gain of function. It was made famous during COVID. And it had a negative connotation then. The idea being that in the laboratory, can we evolve the genetic material in order to increase its capability? Now, in the COVID era, America was accused of funding a Chinese laboratory to make COVID worse in the laboratory. And this is a valid thing to do in virology because you want to anticipate where it might go and therefore get ahead of it, if you will. But I want to flip the script. I want to reframe this as a metaphor for cybernetics. Can we focus, instead of on risk of virus escaping, can we focus on escaping the laboratory with a focus on positive amplification? Can we amplify the capabilities of cybernetics for greater good? And this is what you heard in my opening. Can we expand the collective capacity for evolving cybernetic practice? Now, you've heard me talk about transgenerational as, for me, equally important to transdisciplinary and transcultural, transglobal, transgeographical. And when I work with students, I want to make sure that I and we both express to them and respect in a literal way their education, experience, and worldview. And I want to engage them as student scholars, not just students, but humans interested in learning. And one of the origin stories here, it's a cliche I always use, is when I was talking to Omar Khan about some of these ideas years ago, we both observed, yes, there are many, many, many people that we know in the systems and cybernetics community that we can introduce to students. But what we want to avoid is that student expressing interest to that so-called expert in systems and cybernetics. And to have the expert's response be, yes, I can help you read my 50-page PDF. This is clearly a non-starter, and yet it still goes on. I see it in the halls where I teach. And so can we instead match student scholars with in-world practitioners, not as mentors, as experts, as I said a little bit earlier, but to scaffold their developing a shared vocabulary and at least compatible values, and then to capture that progress and pursue reciprocal benefits for each role. In other words, I don't think we can even assume, I'm 2 generations away from the students I see. I can't even assume that if I use a word that we have the same meaning. And surely the way they prefer to learn, as everyone says, and in fact, it's so funny. I hear fairly frequently, and I'm flattered by it, of a student coming across my work. I'm sure this happens to all of you as well. And inevitably they say, I saw your video. Very rarely do they say, I read your 50-page PDF. So this is a lesson, of course. And so, oh, what happened? I think I hit, yeah, sorry, I hit something and I didn't see it. So we have to scaffold and evolve new language and methods for collaboration that cross the generations, disciplines, and practices. So take this as an initial pillar theme, please.
Paul, can I ask a question?
Please do. Please.
Can you explain why you don't like the word mentors? You've got to not mentors. What's wrong with mentoring?
So my experience of students is if they think you're a mentor, they behave differently. And I think the mentor behaves differently because the mentor's focus is, I know things I want you to know. And I'm trying to break that, not 1,000%, but I want the student to lead. I want the student to say, I'm interested in X. How many times have we all sat in a critique and the person coming in from the outside says about the student project, you should do this. No, I'm against that. Not just because I think it's hierarchical. Surely I have knowledge that I would like them to know, but I'm concerned about that mode. I'm concerned about the presumptive mode that I know something that you should do because I know and you don't, or whatever the context is. So I don't want to overemphasize this, but I do want to say I am asking for a shift such that, and we've done experiments in this, by the way, and with the scaffolding that we're offering and the guidance to mentors, to not mentor, the guidance to the in-world practitioners, notice the careful phrasing there, to try to avoid telling, but rather asking, experiencing, offering, suggesting, but not telling. And it's been quite successful because the student feels seen in a way that they otherwise may not. And also the mentor, I'm sorry to keep using that word, the practitioner gets more from this interaction and understands better that there are correspondences between their life experience, even though tremendous separation of age and discipline and learning style. And when the pair come back to me or they fill out a survey and they say, wow, I was completely shocked that we had so much in common. So this is why.
But Paul, continuing with John's question, if you have people, I mean, in these in-world practitioners that are not necessarily practitioners, but academics, researchers that are in that role, how do you call them? Still in-world practitioners?
Yeah, I think so. The goal so far has been to find in-world practitioners. And even this distinction, we will have students who are already in the world and they come back to get a PhD. So they're both students and practitioners because they've been in the world and they're coming back. So at some point, the boundaries are not clean. And similarly, as you're suggesting, practitioners may be operating in an academic environment. But the initial desire is for practitioners and not for someone who's taught and only taught, but rather someone who has been in the world as much as possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
So where this goes is a series of slides where each one offers some activities of the laboratory. You just heard the one about matching so-called student scholars and in-world practitioners. We have some repositories we're trying to build, and I'm trying to raise some money to do this better. We're trying to distribute a student scholar request such that if my network, which is small at CMU, could we make a platform where anyone in your organization or other organizations could be invited to come from time to time and find someone that they would be interested in connecting with? Can we share this access across a collective? And beyond sharing resources, can we co-evolve practices? This is the ongoing theme. And the encompassing idea is to accelerate adoption and collaboration for facing wicked challenges. So continuing, escaping the lab through collective action, I'm not saying I don't want my lab or this lab here to have a practice, but rather to share it beyond a single laboratory and to create a consortium or a mesh of design programs, any kind of program, any kind of organization, and to operate across multiple locations, to share repositories, progress outcomes, critiques, and indeed establish a kind of praxis sourcing instead of crowdsourcing. It's a little clumsy, but I like the idea of it. Can this be our explicit meta process? And I've started conversations with a couple of other academic organizations at the moment, but I would like to include nonprofits and corporate as well. And it's a very positive response, but it's very early days. So this is the totality of ideas. I'm simply repeating.
Another question, Paul, regarding the previous slide.
I'm sorry. Yep.
If you don't you have any trouble regarding collaboration when you are in a university that is private or that is for profit, and then the know-how or the whatever is then the repository of knowledge that they are creating or the experiments that they are bringing become like part of the intellectual property of this organization, and students are paying for that? How can you make this compatible with this idea that I love of this sharing resources between the community? How do you do that?
So CMU in particular, perhaps, makes a hard distinction. And in general, the student owns the intellectual property that comes from a course. Now, sometimes there are research programs outside of the academic stream, which is somewhat proprietary. I'm actually not familiar with those in detail. I don't engage in them here. But they're usually off in a research lab somewhere, and they're already cordoned off. So I'm only talking about the situations that touch students in an academic situation. And in that case, there is no ownership except by the student of the student's work. And that happens to be a CMU thing.
Thank you.
So we don't face that quite the same way. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So this is sort of the final couple of points. My friend Nathan Feldy pointed out the idea of a clinic might be a useful metaphor to bridge what goes on in the lab and what is a kind of practice in the world. So it's still a bit experimental. It's a bit tentative. It's certainly for learning and gathering data. And so could this metaphor be helpful? And I realized that I could create this idea of the stream of process that goes again. So I have a repository, but there is interest from the students. They create a studio project. There's a transgenerational collaboration with the in-world practitioners, a cross-critique internally, but then exposure into a clinic, which is cross-organizational, an in-world trial, reporting and critique, reporting and assessments, and then a Praxis update, which circles back around to the beginning and becomes part of the cyber repository. So this is another way of thinking about escaping the laboratory. And this is, I won't read this, but this is a more granular version of the same thing, of moving from a student's interests, an internal project, a collaboration, a critique that's initially internal, but then is external across organizations, an in-world trial, reporting, critique and assessment, a Praxis update, and this circling around. And this, of course, is vague, as specific and detailed as it is, but this would be, I think, the thing to continue to work on in a specific instance, and then to document that as a case study, and then to offer it to other situations. So this is my offer today, to be critiqued. How might we incubate cybernetics? And can a laboratory instigate a worldwide experiment? So thank you very much for your patience. And I look forward to continuing our discussion now.
Thank you, Paul. Really, really fascinating. Well, I think that I will invite everyone to come and join the conversation. So who would like to start interacting with Paul?
Please.
And
yeah, that was great. I mean, I wonder about the practicalities of what you're talking about. I mean, I want to ask you about cybernetics and AI and this rebraiding thing, but I'm interested in this idea of a repository that you've been talking about. I mean, I once had a very similar, but much simpler ambition. I thought I'd just collect all the papers that were relevant to what I was thinking about and teaching, you know, post-humanism, cybernetics, cyborg studies, whatever you call it. And I did actually have a website. And the idea was to, you know, list the papers and have PDFs and you could click it. And it quickly became clear to me that it was an almost impossible project, right? It would have certainly taken all my time, you know, 24 hours a day to keep up with it. I had a friend, a grad student, who kind of took it over. And then I was sitting there thinking, well, you know, should he have put that paper in there? Is that the right heading? I'm just asking you about the practical difficulties of accumulating what I think they're talking about with the repository.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I don't think of this as a single human's activity.
Right.
The challenge, of course, is to do more than just collect a bunch of PDFs in folders. I got that now, right? You have yours, other people have theirs. There is interest across a couple of different organizations to not only share such a thing, but especially to make it more accessible. And what does that mean? So can I find a student here, again, a kind of optimistic point of view, who would help cross-index, pull out a graphical model of what it is, allow navigation, but especially, and this is the thing that I think is the add, in the past, when you curated something, you put it somewhere, you organized it, you excerpted it. Today, you can do the magic of hyperlinking, and I'm not suggesting upvote, downvote, but electronically, if this is a value and many people see the value, I think there are ways of forefronting it. Certainly, I would mark certain things as more interesting than others. And in the same way that they might find a video of mine in which I talk about XYZ, perhaps they would follow that lead. I don't understand why it's an unsolved problem 60 years after Ted Nelson that there isn't a good way to do what it is we're both saying is too hard to do. But right. I mean, I also think Pask had some brilliant answers, which no one has succeeded at commercializing, including me. But hope springs eternal, and without it being available digitally, then we're certainly dead. But making it available, I think, can have some directions. But I agree that it's a massive issue.
Okay.
I wish I had a magic wand.
Me too.
Did you want to make a comment about the rebraiding also, Andy, or just?
Yeah, if I can do.
Yeah, I thought so.
It's this image, you know, it's rebraiding cybernetics and AI. And I wonder which aspect of AI you're trying to speak to and hoping to have some effect on it. On the one hand, I mean, I can think of artists and musicians who use AI in very interesting and imaginative ways, who perfectly understand that they're doing a kind of cybernetic thing. So in the field of some of the arts, you know, AI and cybernetics go together very nicely. But of course, when you think of AI, you think about the big tech companies with enormous stores of big data centers that are so big you have to build a nuclear power station to keep them going.
Yeah.
And that looks like just this enormous steamroller running through history. And
Juggernaut.
I just wonder if even dare to think that, you could have some effect on that steamroller.
Fair enough. Again, I agree completely. I'm committed to living at the edge of audacity, Professor Pickering, and I mean that seriously. This is my commitment. I'm here. I'm doing it. I'm doing the best I can. And this is my last effort. It's my end game, I admit, to see what could be done. And what's fascinating to me is two things, and this is what gives me hope. One is the people in AI don't give a shit about the history, and yet there's something that they can learn, and I believe we can help them learn it. And also, almost every day, a student says, wow, cybernetics, I had no idea. Where can I get more? And I live for that. And that's why I'm here. That's why the laboratory is obsessing for me, and it's the best I can do. The reason to try to make a permanent prize is so that at least that, and in fact, sorry, I was about to tell a tale out of school. The main goal of the prize is to, as I said before, is to keep that word in front of the students every year, every year, every year. And of course, what they want as an endowment management system is to change their mind later. Well, if the cybernetics thing, if it goes out of fashion, we want to be able to change the name. And I'm like, no, that's not on. No. So sorry, another rant. You're not wrong, Andy. You're absolutely right. But I'm doing the best I can. And I believe that something can be done. And I think that there's enough value to get it out there, even in these microscopic, perhaps, ways. But also, selfishly, the idea of a collective praxis. And there are other schools interested in teaching cybernetics in design and in architecture. And
I wasn't trying to be totally depressing. I was trying to say I can think of two different groups, right? I mean, there are some people who come to my mind for some reason are artists who are doing very interesting things. I can see how to engage with them, and there's this wonderful fusion of AI and cybernetics. Small data is a phrase that comes up.
That's not hard. That group is not hard, as you're saying.
Yeah, right. Whereas this is, it's going to change metaphors. There's this great iceberg out there that's sailing through the sea. I'm wondering if you could imagine moving that.
What I found is, in a small way, the specifics of the ideas of cybernetics, not just the purpose part, the second order part, the responsibility part. That, by the way, changes designers immediately because they realize that, yeah, it's about them. And therefore, they're responsible for sharing it, as science would say, from their point of view, not as a moral dictum and not as truth, but instead of saying, this is the way the world is, they have to say, I see the world this way, and therefore open others to say how they see the world. That's a fundamental shift in teaching design at an epistemological level. That's the beginning. But from there, it becomes a process of conversation and shared agreement to come about with an answer, not solution, a way forward, something to do together that is valid for that group. And even that, simple as it is to say, is not commonly thought of as the way, it's coming there, but it's not commonly thought of as the way design in the 21st century has to be. So there's all of that, but then there's all of the modeling, all of the causal loop diagramming, all of the mapping, all of the things that benefit from feedback, from the mechanics of the cybernetic world. So I think there's hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul,
Thank you very much.
Fascinating discussion. We have Frank waiting for a
Yes,
question.
thank you for your patience, Frank.
That's okay. I thought maybe I should introduce myself because this is the first one of these I've ever attended, and I greatly enjoyed it. I have to admit, I'm not a proper practitioner or a scholar. I'm a very boring civil servant in the UK, but I was introduced to the program by a podcast years ago, and then more recently again by a program that the Royal Academy of Engineering here in the UK runs for civil servants like myself, where a number of people who I think are part of Metaphor recommended that I sign up. And I was like, well, clearly the universe is trying to tell me something here and I should listen to it. So I hope the interventions are okay. Therefore, I don't really know what the etiquette is for these meetings. So yeah, do shoot me down if I'm going the wrong direction. But I two thoughts really. One on the point that Paul, you and Andrew picked up about like what do we, how does a repository work? And it seemed to me that there are two readily available models I think that you could look at. Right, there's Wikipedia, distributed repository of all knowledge. I'm sure you could, I mean, there are people out there who make specific wikis about their favorite computer games. And if people can do that, then surely we can do it with Cybernetics.
Mhm.
And then the other thing that I'm at risk of straying into an area that I don't know a lot about because I'm not a programmer, but I believe this thing called GitHub, which is where a lot of open source software code lives, right? Which is actually being used by the big companies. And because they use it, they have an interest also in maintaining it. And there is, I think, a very interesting, I think slightly awkward, but interesting balance between their support for it and their use of it and where it then goes. But it seems to be in a, I guess, unstable but equilibrium at the moment. So that was just a sort of thought on the, can you store the data somewhere? I'm sure if we have the people, then the approach is possible. That was one. And I did have a question, and I don't know if the question is allowed because it's taking it back to the fundamentals. So maybe that goes beyond what you're trying to do with the laboratory. But it sort of goes to the point of the juggernaut, right? Like, on the one hand, I was reminded of what you read in the Tao Te Ching, and also maybe in terms of cybernetics, and that yes, it's a juggernaut, but if you push the juggernaut at the right point at the right time, and then they will end up in quite a different place at the end of the trajectory, right? I feel that that's sort of what we're trying to do. But I'm also a bit reminded of, I think it's Danella Meadows who has the system hierarchy, and I'm sometimes a bit worried that in the way you cast it, it feels like the problem is a problem of method, and I always worry that the problem is a problem of power, and I wonder how you relate to that. Because the wicked problems aren't just there because we haven't found the solution yet, but also because there are people who benefit from keeping the wicked problems in place. There are people who benefit from having AI the way it is right now. There are people who benefit from not remediating climate change. There are people who benefit from racism. And so their view of what a solution is going to be very different from what our view of a solution is. And it's not just about method, it's also about like, who has what interests. And I was wondering, I'm sure you have thoughts about this. I was wondering what your thoughts are.
Thanks for both questions. Regarding repository, those two examples that you gave, Wikipedia and GitHub, maybe Reddit is available too as a counterexample, are all valid. And there's a dynamic there that's beyond the conversation here today, but I think there are social and indexable ways of doing this in a way that might be an interesting side conversation, Frank, which I'd be happy to have. And also an algorithm on top of that, which references Pask that some of you are familiar with. In regard to method and power, I can offer method. And in fact, Andy, in part in reaction to you, this is maybe more detail, but I put in the chat a concise reading list around this praxis that I mentioned, and some of the readings I'm sure are familiar to all of you. But this is my pragmatic answer to a method for approaching. So this is something that I would like to see critiqued as a first offer, if you will, in this idea of praxis sourcing. So this is what I would teach. This is how I would go about it. This is how I'm doing it now. It's how I've been doing it for a couple of years. What do you think? What do you have? What do you teach? What's your answer? And I've started to have conversations about this. So this is a boundary object, if you will, a way of making a concrete offer, which Andy and others might have opinions about. But I'm not all the time up in the air here about the wonder of second order, and from there everything will magically work. I'm trying to be pragmatic about it, and there are specifics about this. There's also a link, sorry, in here. Click here for more detailed document, which has not only the readings, but the prompts for students. So they do the reading, and then the prompts return them to their articulation of their domains and concerns. They do the next reading, and they're returned to their domains and concerns prompts. So I think that's quite important. Now, power? I don't know. That's a whole different bag of worms. Surely that's at least, if not more important than anything I can say in terms of method, because it's all about the power. There's the Margaret Mead quote that I will butcher, something about, it's the small group that changes the community from the bottom up, and that's how you get big change. That's all I can hope for, because I want to say to students who want to work for Google, you don't have to work for Google. You can create an algorithm of your own. And they say, well, but I don't want to do what those algorithms do. And I say, right, what do you want your algorithm to do? Oh, you want to foster questions. You want to create generative conversations. You want to avoid the engagement rabbit hole such that everybody's taken down the tunnel to make this company money. Good. So what is that algorithm like? And I've been wanting for years and have not succeeded to gather a list of alternatives to today's algorithms, which would have different social consequences instead of fear, lies, and outrage driving the limbic system in order, to go down the rabbit holes. Are there alternatives to that? And I'm certain that there are. Andy's point to come back to art is fantastic. So many artistic expressions of cybernetic interaction don't have that nasty shit as part of it. And aren't there ways of generalizing is the wrong word, of moving from this artistic world into the conceptual space of ideas, and to have the kind of dance and play that you do with an apparatus in a room that's got robots into a conceptual space, or even staying in an emotional space, whatever. So again, I have to be careful not to say I can help you with the power thing, but I'm doing the best I can with my little world, although I do believe, based on response, that there's some value here. And that keeps me going.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I realize it was a very unfair question, and I do
No,
I do think that again, not to sort of go too much down the political path, but I do think that the putting constraints on people's imagination of what is possible is one of the ways in which you get funneled down a particular path. And I think the work that you're doing to what you said on one of your slides, like giving people shown that they have more viable choices is in and of itself really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Not an unfair question at all. Certainly it needs to be part of change, right? If that domination is unrefutable, is that a word? Then, we're lost. We should go to an island somewhere with a bunker and take our $1 billion with us. Sorry, that was sarcastic.
I think if any of us had $1 billion, we could have solved the repository problem.
Yeah. I often wonder what I would do with $1 billion. I would not build a bunker in Hawaii. I assure you. That doesn't make me a better person. It's just,
Yeah.
it's a different set of interests.
Roger, yes.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. I've been aware of your work for an awfully long time. I keep sort of spotting things and then it disappears again. So it's lovely to
Thank you.
hear you speak. This feels like it's going to be a bit inarticulate, but I've spent quite a bit of time over the last few years in and around Nora Bateson's work, and just knowing what her father wrote about conscious purpose, your very strong focus on purpose here, which is sort of inevitable in cybernetics, really jumped out at me. And I just wonder whether, and I haven't quite got, well, I haven't got the quote at all, but there's something that Gregory wrote in Steps somewhere about conscious purpose, which is not influenced by art and spirituality and dance and the like, is inevitably detrimental to life or something. That's horribly butchered, but that's that kind of phraseology, and the whole business about our conscious purposes are such a tiny fraction of mind in its entirety. And can you just speak to that a bit in the context of what you're doing here? Educate me a bit.
No, I think it's well outside my province. I'm a big fan of the Bateson and the Bateson legacy. Mary Catherine, I think, has been very articulate and not as recognized, and I knew her slightly. She came to some American Society for Cybernetics meetings. But I will say, as a kind of answer, that when a student is in front of me and they're struggling with what they want to do, I say, "What's your intuition?" And I ask them to follow their intuition and not to think just because it's not articulate. You began by saying you are not articulate, but you are. That ability, that human ability, that mystery, the mysterious thing that occurs when you have this glimpse of something, that's a metaphor, that's a sight metaphor, but when you have this sense of something, that's a step back and less articulate, to honor that and to know that it's precious and to bring that forward in your work and to not worry that it isn't perfect, it isn't complete, it isn't, etc. Students all the time feel like they have to write a perfect thesis. And I try to remind them, no, this is the place to write the imperfect thesis. This is the place where you don't have to design something that will really work. When you're in a job, that's your problem, but not him. So this idea of encouraging, I don't know, is it the whole self in some way or just the totality? Heinz used to love to talk about how the nervous system is bathed in the endocrine system and that emotion and so-called rationality, if you distinguish the neuron side from the endocrine hormonal side in some artificial way, you can't. Don't do that. So just to embrace the full human, that would be the way I try to bring it out in students who think they have to be perfectly rational and say everything perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Roger and Paul. I don't know if there is any other comment or question to Paul. But meanwhile, I have a comment, and it's just that I resonate very much with all the experiments that you are doing, because part of the idea, the dream that we have in the Metaforum is as well to develop like a community of practice of people interested in developing Stafford Beer's legacy. And we've been doing some steps in this direction, like for instance, inventing courses and developing a certification process, and also developing like resources, trying the same problem that you were discussing with Andy, of trying to have like a repository of resources, and then you start creating the resources, and then you say, how am I gonna keep it up to date? How am I gonna curate these resources? Who is gonna continue doing that? And this is like a big question that we still haven't found an answer. But again, it's very very similar situations from different branches of cybernetics, and I guess that we all find a lot of resonance
Yes.
in your experience, not only in your experience in particular regarding this education process, but in your experience regarding the attitude of people about cybernetics. No, many people say, no, yeah, I don't want to. No, cybernetics is old-fashioned. Cybernetics is nothing to do with what we are doing. Let's not call it cybernetics. No, and this has been going on since the 1950s and continues to happen. I have had these conversations with people, for instance, from complexity sciences, saying, oh no, cybernetics has nothing to offer. No, we are over cybernetics. We are on top of cybernetics, and all these things that many times have relationships. I mean, again, power struggles and reputation struggles, and who was the one who has more power or more resources, or is more well known, or has more access to the global community, and all these same sort of situations happen again and again. And I really like your attitude when you say that you are committed to live at the edge of audacity, because I think that it is the only possible attitude that we can have if we want to continue disseminating these ideas that have. I think that we share the same emotion, that these ideas have enormous power and are very badly known by people, and we have this mission that is trying to make sure that more people understand, more people practice, and more people discover the power of these ideas, even if they don't come to be the top-ish, or I mean, if they are not competing with things like artificial intelligence or whatever, they are providing a completely alternative experience to those that have the opportunity to learn, and to learn, as you say, in a much more bottom-up approach, in a much more real cybernetic approach. And that experience is invaluable. And people that have had that experience will have an emotion in learning that is different from the emotion in learning in a more traditional top-down way, or more rational traditional systems or computer systems approaches and things like that. So very, very, very interesting. I find it really excellent.
Beautiful, Angela. Thank you for everything you said. I need to find one thing. Thank you. A student wrote to me at 8 o'clock this morning, and I'm sure you've all had this experience, and I don't mean it as singular, but rather as common. Hi, Paul. Thank you for chatting with me yesterday. Our conversation made me even more excited to learn cybernetics. Below, I have linked a document that describes 2 potential ideas for independent study that would be exciting to me and would align with my thesis. What do you think our next steps should be?
Very, very nice. Very nice. And do you have students only from the School of Architecture, or they come from other faculties? Everywhere?
Everywhere in theory, strongly from architecture, and equally strongly now in design. I've had a foot in both schools for a number of years.
Yeah.
But they recently replace is the wrong word. They recently succeeded in a search for a new head of the School of Design. And she and I are seeing eye to eye on many, many things.
Great.
And so Omar and this new character, Ana Maria Pinto da Silva, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Oop, sorry. They want to have more in common in terms of the lab for cybernetics. They want to share the resources and the salary and so on and so forth. But third is the Computer Science School and its Human Computer Interaction Institute. So what I've proposed is a way of having a tripartite thing, but that's just the explicit one.
Yeah.
We had in the submissions for the prize, Cybernetics Prize, the 30 that I mentioned, from the School of Public Policy, from the Africa campus, from the School of Engineering, from design and architecture, sort of all over. So I very much want to make that offer. It just happens that Omar and I go way back. He gets it. He doesn't need to be convinced. And now I think others are following along in a very beautiful way. I feel lucky to have this moment here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I'd be doing if I didn't have this opportunity. Wasting away too much.
So something may be happening, something we may be doing right, because I have the impression that more people are interested in cybernetics again now than 20 years ago.
Something is happening.
Something is happening. I mean, we have new schools of cybernetics. I mean, your laboratory in the States, we have the Australians doing the School of Cybernetics.
Yes.
No, we have, Metaforum here, very, very active, the Cybernetic Society. So something is going on that is making, I mean, is very positive, I think.
We have to catch the wave.
Stephen.
I would like to say, I think, Andy's work has been a major aid to our arguments here. And, the individual papers and especially the books, I think, have been really influential.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, Esteban.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of amplify the enthusiasm for the revival of cybernetics, if you will. I'm acting as a business architect in a semiconductor company in the Netherlands, ASML. And I'm working there with young talent in the AI field from Paris, Mistral. And these guys, some of them are half my age. So I feel more and more like a dinosaur. And maybe in this audience, I'm relatively young. I'm turning 50 next year. But I think for shock value, I brand myself more and more as a cybernetician towards these people, to confuse them. And I'm starting to enjoy that more and more. So I thought maybe that was relevant to share. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's great to hear all of that.
Really, really nice.
Yeah, let us know if we can support you in any way.
John.
Yeah, just a comment, Paul. We're finding more and more people are looking for ways to get cybernetics out into the world in the same way that you are. And there was recently the Cybernetics Society did a presentation by Margaret Heath, which is exactly about that. Let's get it out there. Let's change everything. And we've had similar conversations over the last few months, and we're in the process of discussing a new element to Metaforum, which we're calling barefoot cybernetics, which of course is stolen from Max Neef. But it's very much about getting cybernetics just out to everybody else, out into the world, and understood and applied. And very much with a focus on praxis, that we want to set up these networks of people doing things and thinking about things, and of course it's a huge challenge, and that, like you, we're all very daunted by it, but you can sort of feel it coming from all sorts of different directions. This sort of I think probably in the context where almost everything in society is failing around, all the way around us, and everything you look at is broken and falling apart, and
Yes.
and I think people are looking for new stuff, and I think cybernetics has an enormous amount to offer. And my own experience was coming to cybernetics with a problem, which was how to organize a large cooperative non-hierarchically, and met Stafford and applied it, and it just works incredibly well. And you think this stuff really does work. And I think there's that emphasis to it, that if you can get that message across, there is a huge opportunity here.
The opportunity is now also. We have to catch the wave. It's a moment, right? There have been decades which were not the moment. Ironically, or maybe because of AI doing this crazy thing, this outrageous hockey stick of interest and power of algorithms, power of generative AI, and the degenerative quality of a lot of that, taking away agency, substituting human decision-making, yada, 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 no less the Terminator thing. These other issues are much more immediate, I think, and real and pernicious, because they're not obvious as to what they are doing and what they could continue to do. And so offering alternatives, I think, is a really valid way of thinking about what our story could be, how it's different, and why it's better, forgive me, but it is better for thinking humanistically. I like to think of it as a synthesis of analog and digital. And of course, that's its origins, right? Cybernetics, right? Oh yeah, we got this Turing thing, but wait a minute, we got these neural nets, and wow, they can do cool stuff. And then there's the biological world, and then there's this thermostat over here that's made of, wire and metal, all cool, all a continuum. And preserving that sensibility, I think, is part of the story that we can have. I think we forget how, I want to use the word nasty, but I'm burying in that word something more specific that should be in it, how nasty digital logic is, even if it's computed by a neural net. But an engagement algorithm in Facebook is exactly the kind of nasty I'm thinking of when I say that word. And there are alternatives to that, surely. Maybe they won't make you a trillionaire, but they would make you a multi-billionaire. That's kind of my tease when I talk about alternative algorithms. Roger, you're laughing.
Who is laughing?
It's the trillionaire versus multi-billionaire thing. It's just that tickled me.
Good. Okay, good.
Elena has a hand up, Angela.
Yeah, Elena.
Elena, please.
Hi, I'm on my phone, which doesn't have a hands up function I can access. At any rate, where I see a real possibility, and then this is sort of putting in a plug for Centigrations and other group process, is that so many aspects of governance, particularly around things like zoning, uh, are failures because they don't get everybody in the room and they don't try to figure out how they can satisfy different priorities or different interests. And I think the whole idea of multiple perspectives is something that really needs to be pushed to the forefront, because I see so many failures in, how cities are run, how governments are run, uh, from simply narrowing the perspective and not getting everybody in the room and not taking account of even the right of everybody to be in the room. So that's my 2 cents here.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Who should be in the room?
Yeah, sorry, go on, Paul. Good.
I was just going to say the show Hamilton made famous the phrase, what happened in the room or something. What's the exact phrase, Frank? Do you remember? It happened in the room or
You have to be in the room when it happens.
yeah. Sorry, Angela.
No, I just want to come to support Elena's comment, because I think that one of the beautiful things that cybernetics provide, coming back to the issue of power, that I agree that the issue of power is one of the most important issues and the questions that we never know how to respond. But cybernetics provides this understanding and this perspective, because when you understand that really you need to make sure who is in the room, who can talk in a conversation, who can participate, then you are investing the pyramid of power. You are really creating a bottom-up approach, and that's the bit that cybernetics have enormous power to contribute. And things like integration, that Stephen, for instance, he did an experiment with us in Metaform that was to do the ease integration. That was a way to disseminate integration as an online mechanism. And the power, the potential power of that approach is amazing. And there is many experiments, many tools that are around, but we haven't been able to put them, to distribute it, to put them in the hands of people that could use them for the good of the people, for the good of the planet. And I think that this is what for me is very exciting. And still we have we have lots of things to do. Just focusing on that kind of approaches, I think that will be really important. That is what you are doing in the classroom. No, it's what we are trying to do with the Metaforum. It's what most of us, I think that this is like the heart of us and the power that we have together, understanding that we have that power and we have tools that could reverse the balance of power. And I mean, we need to find creatively ways to use them and to make sure that more and more people know about this, because it's very beautiful and very powerful. So thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Okay.
Beautiful, Angela. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end. I don't know if there is anyone else who have a final question, a final comment for Paul.
That was a beautiful close, Angela.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope to see you all soon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thank you very
All
much.
the best.
Really enjoyed it.
Great to see you. Thanks for your comments, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.